And everybody at Zillow, we'd all come from like Microsoft, Expedia, Amazon. We all had like almost physical or digital product background. And all of a sudden, everyone's like, oh my word, we're an advertising business. And the whole ship, this massive ship just changed direction within that first 6 months though.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the None Size Fits All podcast. My name is Jon Boller, co-founder of Grid Consulting. Exciting show today. Have an industry veteran on, early days Zillow. David Gibbons, living in South Africa, and is actually taking this call about 8 o'clock at night in South Africa. So welcome, David.
Thank you so much, John. Good to see you, man.
Likewise. So what have you been up to? You're in South Africa. You're no longer in the States. Let's hear about David.
It's 9 years that I've been back now. When I first moved back, I worked at South Africa's largest real estate portal, surprise, but that was an easy fit for me, and did good business development work there. I went on to develop e-commerce businesses for our largest retailer here, and then after that, I spent some time at Google. Which was an absolute pleasure. Truly the greatest company in the world to work for if you want to work at a really large organization. So at Google, I was responsible for sales of all things. So my Zillow friends would be surprised to hear that. So I had a team that was responsible for half of Google's portfolio in Southern Africa, and we focused on some really interesting verticals: banking, automotive, telcos, and consumer packaged goods were in my portfolio. But I left Google 3 years ago. Since then, I'm a private investor in Cape Town, and also, like you guys, working on business development and the next big thing. So I'm working on my own at this stage on problems in the autonomy space, which has kind of segued into working on artificial intelligence and a few other interesting problems around trying to figure out why humans are conscious. So.
Like you stood out with Google is truly the best place in the world to work. You've worked at Amazon, you've worked at Zillow, you've worked at Google. What is it that makes them the best place? What is it that stands out? What are the characteristics of that type of company?
Well, I think, speaking very personally, timing is everything. And so I was lucky to be at Amazon when they earned their first dollar of free cash flow. I was lucky to be at Zillow when they pioneered the mortgage marketplace and really kind of expanded online listings. And so when I look at my Google experience, it's very much a timing story as well. I was there when Google pivoted from Google to Alphabet. It's a company that shares broadly. So even though I'm sitting in South Africa, all employees around the world are well synced up with what the company's strategy is. And I think most exciting was being at Google at the very time when they both figured out how to nail mobile on the one hand, and then on the other hand, turn around and pivot the company's strategy to focus primarily on AI. And so they really are an AI-first business today. You don't see it or think about it when you touch their products all the time, but you also battle to imagine what search was like 5 years ago or what YouTube was like 10 years ago. And so AI has made a significant difference in their business. And I must say I bought the promise of that while I was working there. Even though I was, selling YouTube ads, I was at the same time in the TGIF meetings glued to the screen every week, getting an update on what was happening at the mothership. And so they do a really good job, even though they're a global organization, of making every single person around the world very well integrated to what they're doing.
Funny, it's super timely. I told you yesterday I was babysitting my two nephews. Their mom was at work all day. She's a nurse. And my brother works for Google. He's a UX program manager for the cloud, for their cloud business. He wasn't home this Sunday because he's in Switzerland, and he's there on business for Google. And the thing that's kind of stood out through this whole process is it is this global business, and they do a great job of kind of, I guess, helping and making sure that everyone around the world feels a part of one. And I've worked in satellite offices myself, and it's a really hard thing to do.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, they do a better job than most of just keeping the nonsense out of the way. You might remember from working with me that administration is not my strength. And I was responsible for quite a sizable chunk of the business, but there was none of this bureaucratic overhead of the budget cycle and, reporting for reporting's sake, et cetera, et cetera. All of that moved out the way, and I was in a client-facing role. And so I was able to just spend all of my time focusing on my client's outcome. And so I think they've got that nailed. To do that at scale is impressive.
Sure. And okay, so let's go there. The early days of Zillow. So you started in 2006. Walk us through the early days of Zillow. Like, you kind of touched on it there, but what was it like?
The job that Jay Thompson then took and just totally perfected didn't exist. I mean, social media was entirely new. Drew had to nag us all to focus on Facebook. He saw it before anybody else did. And so I was recruited thanks to a friend I'd worked with at Amazon, Yorit. And Yorit was head of operations at Zillow at the time. And when Zillow launched, they weren't too sure themselves what they were going to do. And being a media business was kind of a side game. And so a big part of the launch plan was actually around enabling people and agents to be more self-sufficient in the sales of homes. And so there was a branding exercise around yard signs and all of this type of stuff. And there was a logistics business planned, and that logistics business needed direct-to-consumer fulfillment. So the plan was going to be to ship all of this paraphernalia to customers who were selling their homes. And that was the plan, and all of this stuff was stockpiled in a office when I got there. And the reason I was recruited was because I built the dropship business at Amazon, which was a precursor of the marketplace that they have today. And and so I got there. I interviewed on launch day, and the interview went really, really well. They said, they need someone to fill this position really, really fast. And so I joined the company. And we were working out the logistics about how this program was going to work when all of a sudden 6 million people showed up to the website. And everybody at Zillow, we'd all come from like Microsoft, Expedia, Amazon. We all had like almost physical or digital product background. And all of a sudden everyone's like, oh my word, we're an advertising business. And the whole ship, this massive ship just changed direction within that first 6 months, though. So there I was sitting very excited for Zillow at their early success, but also with the early realization that what I was recruited to do was like the worst mistake the company could have ever made. And so we quickly canned the program. But at the same time, me and Drew were working on various pieces. When there's a startup, everybody gets all hands on deck. And we were noticing that while the product was massively popular with consumers, there was a communication job to be done. And it was a communication job that needed to scale because there were, I think at that stage, 80 million homes on the website. And the estimate wasn't nearly as accurate as what it is today. And people were going to dinner parties, and all of a sudden, all hell was breaking loose around, what's my home actually worth? And at this exact time, social media became prominent. And so we saw, Facebook go open the network up to the general public around about that time, et cetera, et cetera. But before that even, there was this blogging scenario where real estate agents had started building their own websites, especially those who were ahead of the tech curve. And they were writing all sorts of stories about us. So I realized and Drew realized that we had damage control to do. And it wasn't a matter of being the spin doctors, because you can't get away with that, especially when you're not on the camera, you're not in control of the conversation, you're on someone else's website. You just got to go out there and tell the truth. And so what we did was we made an effort with Stan's team in particular and Amy Batinsky's marketing team to really understand the product and then go explain it to the industry. And we had very early success there. So I can remember a lunch with Lloyd Frink, where I took him to lunch one day. I could see like the train coming in the tunnel, and I took him to lunch and basically said, Lloyd, look, you and I both realized I don't have the job that I was recruited to do. Like, it doesn't exist. It's not part of Zillow's future. But here's this new thing that we really need to be focused on, which is we need to look at this internet as a platform for, really making sure that we're understood and that our value proposition gets as spread as far as possible. And really the big idea at that stage, it seems like trivial now, but at that stage, writing on someone else's blog or commenting on Facebook, etc., was the only way to leave. It was so much more effective than having a customer service call where you're having the same conversation over and over again. So yeah, you can go to one prominent person's website, leave a message, and thousands of people can read it. And this was my pitch to Lloyd, was like, let us build a business, or let us build a function within the business that really focuses on this kind of grassroots marketing. And so, from there, it was very accidental that Drew and I became kind of the face of the company from the industry's perspective. We weren't there to sell them anything. We were just there to explain what Zillow did. And you can imagine in those days, in a pre-Zillow world, it was quite earth-shaking for a lot of people.
When you started, you were going to focus on helping agents be more self-sufficient, and then the Zestimates came out and traffic just blew up. So now you're focused on Zestimate control, and then you saw the opportunity to basically help the industry better understand what it is that Zillow was doing. It's interesting because it seems as though a lot of companies, whether they're portals or brokerages or just the tech companies that are supporting agents, everyone is really shifting towards helping agents be more self-sufficient. So it's almost like a throwback to what you were originally asked to do, because everyone is investing in tools to help agents be more productive.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, at the time, the tools were not bespoke real estate industry tools. Everyone was cobbling together whatever plugin they could that fit into a WordPress website. And, there was no such thing as listing websites, et cetera, et cetera. And so, it was just whatever hot plugin came out this week. We were helping communicate to the industry. It was odd stuff. Like, people were getting excited about traffic counters and that kind of stuff, back in the day. There was none of this embeddable maps and all of that kind of thing. But as it rolled, this is where, in particular, Drew, and he's gone on with this at Geek Estate blog. Anyone who's watching who isn't already part of the Geek Estate audience should definitely spend some time there. But Drew saw the opportunity to, on the industry outreach side, focus on helping real estate agents understand how to make tech part of their business. It was very, very early days, but lots of fun. I mean, the real estate bar camps were the big movement back in that day, and so we'd fly to different places and kind of give our pitch on SEO. What we were actually doing, John, we weren't pitching Zillow. We were pitching the strategies Zillow had used to grow. And so we were like, okay, well, at the time, Drew was responsible for SEO or fit within our team. And so we'd basically go and say, okay, well, this is what we've learned about local search engine marketing. And then, the next big thing would come along and it would be video. And everyone was walking around with those flip cameras. And so we'd go and talk about our experience with using flip cameras, et cetera, et cetera. So it was just about trying to stay one step ahead of those innovations, adopt them within the company, and then imagine them rolled out in a one-person business at a real estate agency. It was a lot of fun.
So I'm always fascinated with Jay's role, originally your role, and then Drew still does it. The job of social media discussion person or like confrontation or whatever. I mean, there's lots of adjectives to use here. How hard is that?
It's an incredibly challenging job. I think what people don't realize is it's the one job in the company that you can't switch off when you go home. If you're in the middle of a hot conversation, if you leave that conversation for 2 hours, someone else gets the moral high ground. It's amazing how quickly truth can be distorted. And you see this playing out on the global stage today. I mean, today, just 3 years ago, this phenomenon of fake news didn't even exist. I mean, what is fake news? It's either news or it's not news, And so the ability to kind of distort the truth through influence and power is something that's really, really hard to stay ahead of. On top of which, there's the opposite side of that coin is the necessity to maintain humility, because especially in our industry, realizing that you're representing, the 100-pound gorilla, and you feel like an individual. You are an individual going there to your own little keyboard. Literally, he has the tools of the trade. It's like my phone and my keyboard. That's it, and me. But to the guy on the other end of the conversation, you are the embodiment of, just high tower. There are obviously a lot of kind of personal issues to deal with. It's a growing, it's a personally growing position to be in. We developed coping mechanisms. Drew and I would hand off conflict situations between ourselves. I can remember many, many walks around the building. Most of all, doing an externally facing role, as you well know, is a lot of responsibility because you take on the brand. And again, it requires humility and it requires deference to the brand and staying on topic. So we'd have to spend a lot of time really understanding the mechanics of this estimate, which is something people didn't realize. When you're in a marketing position, a traditional marketing position, you're controlling the message. Whereas here, someone else is controlling the message, and so you've got to be on their topic.
When you went and started working at the company in South Africa, the largest portal there, is this the same? The phenomenon does that also exist, or I guess what parallels are there to like what you experienced in South Africa versus when you're here in the States?
I think so. Just speaking directly to that company, it's called Property 24. Amazing business. And I was, again, from a timing perspective, lucky to be there at a time when the CEO really figured out how to grow the business. We were the contender brand. And, a few years later, we were 3 times larger than the front runner. But it was, you got to understand the internet business in South Africa is like rolling the clock back 10 years. And so it's a lot of grassroots strategy around SEO, business development, kind of integration deals and that type of thing. Less so than a large social media push. People here don't spend as much time on their phones, although it's getting there now. And we don't have the access to data like you guys do there. I think the biggest difference is the market is significantly different. The real estate brand franchise in America has done an incredible job entrenching the agency on both sides of a real estate transaction. And so you really don't find that in the rest of the world, and it creates an extremely different dynamic in the home sales business. And so, people who buy a home in the States get a level of service that you just don't get pretty much anywhere else in the world, actually.
It's interesting because, you talk about data. Data is highly kind of segmented, and professionals want to figure out how to basically put all their data in one place and have like kind of a streamlined system, but I haven't seen it yet. Let's shift a little bit to kind of a couple of trends and I'll kind of go through each of them. iBuyer is this new thing here in the States, and a lot of this, you just mentioned it, is about service. How do you provide and eliminate friction, and ultimately that leads to better service and things like customer satisfaction scores and all that, make it easier for the buyer or seller. What are your thoughts on iBuyer? And you can feel free to talk about the different companies that are doing it and how much money is flowing into this space.
Yeah, man. I think it would be a mistake not to consider where that model is competitive. I'm invested in a startup in Cape Town that does a similar type of business, and it's going through its growing pains, etc. But in terms of being able to articulate the value proposition from a customer's perspective, I think there's a few things that traditional real estate should be taking note of. I think for me, the biggest surprises have been when you take away the in-office competition that you have in the traditional model, and when you allow an agent's job to be split into specialties. If you combine that with a seamless customer experience, it's almost unbeatable in terms of value proposition. And so, without stepping on any toes, I think you're always going to have the high-touch, high-end real estate professional. But in the mid-market, I think it's a foregone conclusion that a level of service way, way, way beyond can be provided by a team where specialties are succinctly divided, where CRM is very, very well integrated, and where you have, especially as you move to a world of AI, where you have intelligence aiding the workflow to a point where intervention is not something that happens when your customer phones you, but when your system anticipates a need. So if you're managing a really large portfolio of listings, having intelligence, basically thinking about which home, seller, buyer, etc., you should be touching at the very next moment, I think is really hard to compete with when you look at the traditional model, where it's a lot of, loan ranges just happen to be occupying their space next to one another. And I know that I'm oversimplifying things there, and a lot of those loan ranges are incredible crack shots. But yeah, it's the future. I think, workflow in particular, technology has come a long way. And if you have an agile business that's able to learn and adapt really fast to the kind of learnings within the branch or the agency or the brand, it becomes very difficult for a standalone agent to compete with that. What I saw in this business, for example, is that our juniors were doing 10 times the transaction volume that a single real estate agent is doing on their own, purely because of that high volume space. Now, the one argument is, oh man, they're touching so many transactions, they can't give a high level of service. But actually, we live in the information age, and knowledge is ultimately the source of the best service. So if someone's touching more transactions, they're learning more about the game faster, they have more relevant market knowledge, and they can apply it to the next transaction. So when it comes to repeatable business processes, scale, volume, concentration, a team-based approach is hard to beat. When I worked at Amazon, my second job there after building drop shipping was business process outsourcing. We built large call center operations in India and in the States as well. And really, you can bring a lot more systems rigor, training, and recruiting expertise to that kind of operation at scale than you can when you're relying on recruiting the next hot agent in a particular market, for example.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm a fan of the model. I'm sure I haven't seen all of the variations that you guys are seeing playing out there.
Yeah. So distilling it down, because I think a ton about iBuyer, and I hear iBuyer as this concept, and it's a concept where you then completely followed it up with there's a lot of different versions of it. So when I really break that down, it's like iBuyer really is having the capital to basically be able to quickly acquire the home and have the capital to work with. Then it's workflows, which I think personally is the hardest part. I think getting capital should be the easiest. Creating workflows to streamline the process. And then the third is having a team of really good specialists so that you can basically continue to improve in conjunction with workflows on your efficiency. And that's and so I guess when I think about the different versions of iBuyer, there are so many different ones, and I haven't heard it really thought of in all of these different layers. Because think about Opendoor or OfferPad or Knock or Zillow or Redfin. None of them are the same. And then you have these other ones in Seattle that keep popping up, and they're all kind of focused on a different version of it. But how do you scale the latter two parts, the workflows and the team of specialists, without creating bloat? Because I'm sure you saw it with Google and Amazon and with the size of those companies, specialists are good. But what if specialists leads to an additional 10 specialists that weren't needed because not everyone was kind of hands down and getting dirty? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you've worked in a very highly productive operations environment, and it's just about not building in jobs that are not needed. And you basically only add a new function if it can support itself financially. Of those pieces of the iBuyer model that you articulated, I think the one that's by far at risk is the first one, is the capital. I wouldn't be worried at all about the operations side of things, as long as you are removing inefficiencies faster than what you're scaling the team. And so here, the thing to do is to recruit someone who's come from Amazon. They have a culture of, Bezos used to say, no service is great service. And what he meant by that is no need to follow up and serve on a particular part of the workflow means that we have optimized that piece of the workflow from a systems perspective, that it's no longer generating contact. And so, as long as you have that no service is great service mentality, then basically, I mean, and this must be clearly understood. It's no complaints is great service, is what he's basically saying. As long as you've got that mentality, then the operations side, I'm not worried about. You've got to have your systems people support your operations people. I think, this is where people get into trouble is when they see a body intensive operation like that, they just throw bodies at it, and they don't dedicate systems resources to it. I think the winners in this space will be the ones who have the systems development team sitting side by side with the operations team and solve their problems as they go. But as I say, in the general model, my far bigger concern is on the capital side. I think you're going to see fortunes, way more fortunes lost than made. It's a consumer industry. I started my career in supply chain optimization, and in consumer packaged goods, it's hard enough to predict how many soaps you're going to need on the shelf this week, or fresh groceries, or whatever it might be. But to have a perfect visibility to the demand for homes and to fund those transactions, yeah, it's an interesting gamble. I think it's a gamble.
Yeah, it's in the past kind of 6 months, the word that I keep hearing, or I keep hearing, the supply optimization. And when I think of that, everything I've done for the past kind of 6 to 7 years was workflows and optimization of those workflows. And you came from Amazon. I have the same belief that if you really want to execute and win in that space, Amazon knows it better than anyone. And their big kind of warehouses, like when I read about how they're now like slowly moving people, and that doesn't mean people are being laid off, it just means they're moved to different roles, but they're now like making it even more efficient through these like robots that are doing a lot of the work. I mean, I don't think that's about job losses as much as basically finding different roles and filling new gaps. So I'm super fascinated with that. Let's pivot to brokerages. And I guess let's talk about Purplebricks and Redfin and Compass. Would love to hear kind of your thoughts on those. Actually, let's also do EXP as well. Like to hear your thoughts on those four.
Yeah, I think what EXP has achieved has just been phenomenal. I can remember Drew and I meeting with those guys in the early days. If ever there was a business that I was wrong about in terms of projecting their trajectory, is EXP. And so I am very, very happy to say to my friends there that I was dead wrong. Congratulations. It's a phenomenal success story. And it's just basically a business built on the heart with a digital face. And I think that's what people discount is that you can't. You know, a lot of people claim that you can't build a digital business with a heart or a soul. And actually, you know, the reverse is true. But you got to stick to your knitting, and you got to make sure that you keep the soul as you also scale the digital side of the operation. I think with all these businesses, and I think my earlier comments on iBuyer in terms of the back office side still apply. So let's switch gears to the front office and kind of the face of the company. How do you position these offerings and how do you differentiate them? I think that's the challenge here. I think something I really came to appreciate when I was at Google is how singularly focused all their most successful products are. And so I think it's a matter of finding a really big niche, not building out the most complex possible offering, not being the Microsoft of real estate. That's never going to work. You want to be the Google of real estate. Gmail, you use it to do just one thing. YouTube, you use it to do just one thing. Search is the iconic solution in the space. Still just got that one search bar, and all of the magic happens behind the curtain. And so I think that's the trick for these businesses is how do they maintain their consumer face looking as simple as possible so everyone can understand exactly what your value proposition is, while at the same time adding as much magic behind the curtain as possible. I've always respected what Glenn's done at Redfin. When we were building this business in Cape Town, in the early days, I was involved in marketing. I spent a lot of time looking at his messaging, and I think Redfin's got it dialed in at this stage in terms of the way they position what they do differently. And it's interesting, they've backed off a lot of the data-intensive kind of stuff, and they really, really just stick to just like the core value proposition, and they do a good job of segmenting their traffic flow really, really early on the website, just through a couple of signals. They know who they're dealing with. Buyers or sellers, they're all looking for different things. And I think they also customize the story slightly to market conditions as well. And so all of that's important if you're in the space. I think it's a space with promise, but it's a hard work business. It's an incredibly hard work business. There's all the IP is less technical and more kind of BPO, as we call it, business process operations, is where the secret sauce lies, I think, for those companies.
So what about Purple Bricks? I don't know as much about Purple Bricks, but I know they're now here in the States. What are your thoughts on them?
You got to understand, they come out of the UK, where agents were making 2% on one side of a deal, and then they had to beat that pricing, right? So just think about that for a second, right? So you got only 2% in the deal, but the agent's on one side of the deal, and then Purple Bricks comes along and innovates and clobbers that from a pricing perspective and delivers better value to customers. And this is where I say, people need to watch the third world for innovation in the future. And I'm not saying the UK is a third world, not at all, but they had a far tougher market. And so the entrepreneurs building technical startups in their market had to be more innovative. Whereas if you've got 7.5% on the table, and then you just kick back 1% or 1.5%, you're not stretching yourself enough. And all of a sudden, Purple Bricks comes along, and it's game over for everybody whose business model was based on a 33% price reduction, because these guys can do it at 1% or less of the transaction. You speak to their customers, and they'll tell you that they do it well. I think what's really, really interesting is this hybrid between that basically empowers the seller to become more involved in the sale of their listing. In my market in particular, the customers are responding incredibly well to being empowered to show their own homes. Now, this is a phenomenal idea, right? And it's sacrilege. There's going to be people who are watching this who flame you and how can you have that Gibbons town? Sellers can't sell their own homes. But I tell you what, an idea that we had early on at Zillow was to have sellers position what they love about the home. And it was always a really, really good product innovation, I thought. And so that's what you're finding, is that when a buyer can speak to the seller about what they really love about living in that area and where the favorite coffee shop is and all of this kind of stuff, I'm all for agents' local knowledge, but if you're looking at larger and larger teams, that starts to get watered down. And so it's this hybrid model that starts to, in a way, respect sellers more, which is the messaging they get, right? I'm not saying that traditional agents are disrespectful. I'm just saying with every evolution of technology, the theme is empowerment. I'm now empowered to publish my own Facebook page. I'm now empowered to, put up this podcast with you or whatever it might be. And so you must always look for the empowerment angle in a traditional business. That's what tech does. Consumers just want autonomy, basically.
Okay. Awesome. This is fantastic. I guess the last section, and I'm going to put Compass in between modernization of the brokerage and kind of traditional brokerages, because what I've seen lately is a lot of what I would consider traditional brokerages they're staffing up big product teams, and they're now saying publicly, we're going to build our own products in-house for our agents. Come join our company because we're going to give you a CRM, a marketing center, and all these other kind of tools. And Compass obviously has a ton in funding, and they are the new kid to the block. So what are your thoughts on this change as it relates to brokerages now going out and building their own product teams?
Yeah, so I'd say half of the entrepreneurs that I talk to bring me ideas for what you call enterprise software. And now you're talking about owned enterprise software. And I normally try to spend at least 45 minutes out of an hour meeting talking them out of it. The enterprise software game is a really, really, really hard game. You know, if you, and there's a couple of problems with it. Number one is functionality flows to the most broadly adopted platform, regardless of how many features it has. And so, you know, email is email. You're not going to reinvent email. But the problem is, as soon as you start saying, you know, we have a bespoke email system, then all of a sudden the queries start to come in, and this guy, Joe's got a great idea, and Sally's got a great idea. And, you know, your tech team, every time their answer's the same. We can build that. We can build that. We can build that. And the next thing you have is just bloated piece of junk software where like 1% of the features get used, and the tech team is larger than the sales team, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I'm not particularly excited about what's happening in those models. I think some of them are well funded. You know, it's kind of like 1999, where it's like we are a software business. I think people like Salesforce have done really well, and so now all of a sudden VCs are looking for, you know, the kind of bespoke enterprise solution play by vertical. When I think the smarter strategy is just to go and get Salesforce and really focus on integrating that really, really well, understand how to customize it properly, etc., or whatever other platform it might be. But yeah, my personal preference when it comes to enterprise software is, you know, always take it off the shelf unless you're Amazon. Unless you have a plan somewhere along the line, which no one understood in the early days of Amazon, where we were like, why do you want to build your own accounting platform? Are you crazy? You know, but it ended up becoming a product. So unless you have a plan for that enterprise backend to become a product somewhere along the line, you should not be coding that. And that's just my personal take.
For sure. All right, this is all the real estate stuff is so good. I want to hear about you now. You're still active on social media. Let's talk about your purpose. You're an investor living in South Africa. You don't get in the water too often because of the big great whites. You do. What are you about these days? What's your driving force? What's your mission? What's your purpose?
So, John, you know, I've been fortunate to be able to think about what's coming next. And so I stopped about a year and a half ago to do that properly. And I got myself immersed in this blockchain, autonomous technology, or autonomous network space, and spent some time trying to figure that out. So let's stop for a minute before I talk about what I'm working on now, and just kind of talk about blockchain application in the real estate space. We've talked about a lot of, you know, what are currently well-funded and fast-growing opportunities, but an entrepreneur should be thinking about what's coming next. You know, you got to skate to where the puck is headed. And from my perspective, when it comes to assets, the puck is headed to blockchain. And so, yeah, you've got the second biggest asset class in the world, with so far very, very little innovation in the autonomous space. And so there's a lot of opportunities. I don't want to talk much about buying homes and cryptocurrencies. Currency is by far the least interesting opportunity in the blockchain space. Currency is kind of the water of economics. It has no actual intrinsic value until you go and package it up. But a home has both equity and capital value. And there are not enough people thinking about this right now. And so, yeah, I think that, you know, I'll spend a lot of time thinking about that. When I get back into the job market next year, or rather into the startup space next year, it's likely I'm going to be doing something in the housing / blockchain space. But there are so many opportunities to just entirely kill it and create an entirely new game. I'll give you a couple of examples. You know, what you can do is you can secure equity on these autonomous networks without a middleman. And what's really phenomenal about that is you can now start to do really interesting things. So let's take three different use cases. The first one, let's just say you have a passion for the homelessness problem, which is something very much on my radar. You know, before you had to give your money to a middleman, and that middleman passed on and passed on and passed on, and by the time it got to the person whose home equity it went into, you weren't guaranteed that you were getting 50 cents on your dollar. Now that entire pipeline can be written as a single contract, published once on a blockchain, and every single dollar that goes into the homelessness problem can go directly into homes or mortgages or, you know, development projects internationally or whatever it might be. So I think that's one thing that's really interesting. Then let's move on and talk about moving capital now into this kind of programmable internet, if you want to think of it. You know, what a blockchain is, it's an internet of assets. So if the internet we have today is a network of information. Blockchain is a network of assets. So what the internet did for information, the blockchain is going to do for assets. So all capital, all equity is going to be entirely disrupted. And as we know, these things, capital or equity, are a lot more valuable than information even. And so the disruption that's coming globally to markets, all financial markets, but particularly things that are wrapped up in kind of this equity capital relationship, like housing, for example, is going to be quite immense. I'll give you another example. You could attach my mortgage to a token on a blockchain where that mortgage is under constant refinance. It shops for its own financing. And when there's a better deal, it just literally refinances itself, adding capital value to my house through a better mortgage. Now, you don't even need consumers to wake up to the fact that they have the opportunity to refi anymore. My other really favorite example is in income producing property, and I think this is where it's going to take the industry by storm. Airbnb is my favorite example. So we run an Airbnb on the beach just down the street from here, and the interesting thing is that the income on that Airbnb, from an income perspective, it actually doubles the capital value of the property. So for me to borrow the money that property generates is a mortgage loan of the same value of the equity in the home in the residential market. So that property to us, while we own it on Airbnb, is worth twice what it's worth in the residential market. Now, if that asset was tokenized and its income saleable together with the sale of the house, all of a sudden you double the value of some property. And so this is what I'm talking about in terms of bringing capital productivity to the asset itself in a liquid network. And then the opportunities beyond that are immense. I mean, liquidly trading property assets on a global market opens up these international buying opportunities, etc. The internet's already done a good job putting the information front and center globally. Now you can actually make the asset tradable real time, 24/7 on a global marketplace.
Is anyone doing this? I mean, like these last couple, I mean, they're awesome. It sounds great. Like, is anyone doing it? I'll write down the names. I would love to research them.
You know, what people don't realize is every valuable company, every massively valuable, fast-growing company has, to one extent or another, employed autonomy. So Airbnb has employed autonomy. Uber has employed autonomy. Amazon has employed autonomy, right? So they don't even own any of the supply chain anymore, or very little of the supply chain anymore. But they're all one-sided and all the capital value accrues to the brand. What's going to happen is, along the line, entrepreneurs are going to wake up and say, we can do this on both sides and pass on capital value to the players, where, the Uber drivers have a stake in the brand, you don't talk about a brand anymore. You talk about the protocol. They have a stake in the protocol. Their vehicles become more valuable. The Airbnb of blockchains, the owners of the home have a stake in the protocol. And so the network becomes more valuable. And all of a sudden, these brands aren't required anymore. And so, no, I mean, these protocols exist. The blockchains exist. The scaling solutions are being deployed right now. But like idiots, people are still just literally spending their time forex trading cryptocurrencies when these other massive potential businesses are sitting on the sidelines with very few people working on them. I think the problem is too many people within that space are focused on replacing the central banks, and not enough of them thinking about innovating for consumers. And so there's the ecosystem around the Ethereum blockchain, I think, needs to be called out. They're the ones thinking about building the future. And I think in that space, you're going to see some of these startups, kind of coming up on. It's starting to happen. The other challenge they have is that these are autonomous businesses, and so they talk about projects, not companies. And so we're still busy working out what that means. But it also is ahead of the game. So realize we live in a day and age when 50% of the workers in the US work from home. And they work on multiple projects, and they work across multiple companies, et cetera. Now, allowing those people to have a stake in the businesses that they work in, or to allow their human capital to earn them equity in the projects that they decide to back, is really, really, really interesting.
Sure.
So yeah, it's an autonomous future, and autonomy is just basically a fancy word for freedom. Who doesn't want that?
In the lead up to this, you talked to my partner about the difference in entrepreneurs in the U.S. versus international, kind of how they come about. And you and I didn't get to talk about that. I would love to hear you kind of highlight the differences that you've seen in terms of entrepreneurs' approach the problem versus purpose and those things.
The challenge we have in the third world and basically everywhere outside the US is everyone wants to be American. And so just trying to rip off the system that worked in the Valley is, I don't think is the right strategy for the rest of the world. And you have to play to your strengths. And so it's a matter of stepping back and saying, okay, well, what are our strengths? And if you're in the Valley, your biggest challenge is articulating the problem. If you're pitching for funds in the Valley, you spend 90% of the pitch kind of just carving out that, like eking out that slice of a problem, because you guys live in a world where every problem's been solved, right? So you're just like trying to redefine the problems. This is what Elon Musk talks so much about. Whereas where I live, you just need to step out on the street and like 1,000 problems slap you in the face. And so it's interesting. I encourage our local entrepreneurs to think differently about the way they go about this. First of all, people say, African solutions. It's like, no, focus on the African problem. Everyone here is trying to address the high end of the market with a solution that could sell in the US. And I basically say, well, if you come from the bottom and you address the low end of the market, you create a pie that doesn't exist today. And if you create a pie that doesn't exist today, it's kind of like what Google did with Gmail again, which is one of my favorite business examples, is that, and no one thought of giving email away for free. I'm that old that I remember a day when everyone paid for their email software, right? And so if you can do the same thing with services that Africans don't have access to today, what does free banking look like? What does free insurance look like? I know these are crazy ideas, but if you solve that, I guarantee you that the first world is going to want that product. And, that's where I challenge our entrepreneurs is don't solve the problems that the Valley is solving. Solve the problems that will address what you see on the streets here in South Africa. And if you get that right, and, necessity is the mother of invention. If you get that right, then the rest of the world's going to want it too. And so I think having problems is an asset if you think about it right.
All right. So David, this has been incredibly fascinating. It's been awesome reconnecting first and foremost, but what's next? Like, what are you working on? Where can people find you? How do we stay in touch?
Well, John, as of next year, I'll be back to building teams, building companies, and changing the world. I've come to a solution which is a method of consciousness that has to do with an understanding of the way your brain processes time, in particular, and is rooted in the semantics of reality. Semantics is information about information. We've never understood kind of how the brain understands what is real, what is not real, et cetera, et cetera. And really the problem of, why it is that we can build robots with incredibly better senses than humans and incredibly more powerful brains than humans, but they operate like fools and can't objectively control their own behavior. And this is going to sound odd, but I've cracked that problem, and so I'm busy writing up that paper, and I look forward to next year using that research to do work in this space. It's a broad field, but I think without overstating it, I think the problem of artificial superintelligence is solvable within the next couple of years. And so I look forward to working on that. I've developed a total passion for neuroscience. I am spending a lot of time studying physics and the problem of what is time. And so I've enjoyed this time of research and kind of just thinking. It's taken me back to my engineering studies, etc. But I need to wrap up the research, publish my paper, and then kind of get a team around it and figure out what the most logical applications are. I've got a few ideas. Watch this space, man, and I really appreciate the time. I wish you guys the best of luck with what you're working on. You have always attracted an incredibly talented bunch of people around you, and I know why. You don't only do the hard yards, but you're also your heart is always in the right place. So I wish you guys a good and best of luck with everything you guys are focused on.
Likewise, David. This has been awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for staying up late and chatting with us. So that's going to wrap up the None Size Fits All podcast. Thank you all for viewing in. Make sure to follow David on all social media, and he's super active. And follow Grid. Have a good day. Thanks.